Hey guys, thanks so much for being here back on this episode of Fast Keto. If you are listening to this episode and you want to watch it, head over to my YouTube channel at The Ketogenic Girl and you can watch me and my guest on today's episode. So today we have Ali Miller joining us today. She's an integrative functional dietitian, the author of Naturally Nourished and the Anti-Anxiety Diet. And she just came out with a brand new book, the Anti-Anxiety Diet Cookbook. So we talk all about her contagious passion for using nutrients and food as the foundation of treatment protocols and programs. She has a food as medicine philosophy that I love, and it is supported with up-to-date scientific research for functional approaches to healing the body. We talk so much about her delicious recipes today and how to heal the gut and improve your mood with keto. And we talked all about sugar and low carb and doing low carb for our families and back to school and how do we meal prep and batch prep and make eating real food easier and being in the kitchen easier. We talked all about sugar and processed foods and feeding our families real foods. We talked about carbs and leptin and hormone and carb ups versus not doing carb ups. To talk about the thyroid. It was such a fun episode and I loved having Ali back on the show today. And she shared her recipe, amazing recipe that I got to try from her new cookbook. And we're going to share the recipe with you guys. Is her lemon lavender CBD balls, and they are super delicious. And we talk all about CBD as well and why you can utilize that to have a positive calming effect on your mood. So it is a great episode because we dig into a lot of the science behind all of these things. So I hope you guys enjoy today's episode with Ali, and thanks so much for being here. Welcome back to Fast Keto, Ali. Thank you so much for being here. How's it going this morning?
It is going awesome, and I'm so excited for another fun conversation.
Now I have to ask you, because it's morning time for you, what's in your mug this morning?
Girlfriend, I already sucked it down. But it was just we've been doing a lot of French presses over here. On the weekends, we do the fancy pour over Chemex, but usually a French press is what Brady and I do. And I only do 1 cup of coffee, but it always has coconut oil and grass-fed butter in it. Sometimes cinnamon, sometimes a little bit of vanilla bean, and sometimes I'll add CBD oil to it. If it's like a high intense day and I want to mitigate the caffeine jitters, I'll do a little bit of CBD oil so I kind of stay grounded but fueled.
We have to talk about that later because of your CBD balls that you had
yes.
At KetoCon, which my husband was pretty stoked about. I'm just noting that down.
Yes.
I've been trying. Have you tried any of these adaptogenic coffees? That's what I have in here.
Okay.
Is this Four Sigmatic coffee? And
yes.
I like them too because they make this podcast possible. And they sent this to me. I've been trying it out. And this one with lion's mane, I found some. They were double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled studies that showed some improvement with cognitive impairment. And I don't know if you've tried them out before, any kind of mushroom coffees?
I have, yeah. And I actually get lion's mane at my farmer's market ground. And absolutely, that's the one that I go to for neurogenesis and neurological function. And medicinal mushrooms, I think, we're just starting. I mean, they've been used, of course, for thousands of years, but we're just starting on a scientific research level to understand the variances of them, So like turkey tail has awesome research associated with breast cancer. And then, we know reishi and its immune modulating effects and adaptogenic influence. But I think it's a whole world that we're just going to start to tap into that iceberg and really see some awesome medicine coming out from.
Yeah, I noticed that you talked about adaptogens a little bit in your book and you have some cool recipes about that. So tell us all about your brand new cookbook.
Sure. So the Anti-Anxiety Diet nonfiction book came out last fall in 2018. And I just put out the Anti-Anxiety Diet cookbook, basically like a year on its heels. And it is over 80 recipes that are all anti-inflammatory and focused on supporting gut lining health, the microbiome, rebalancing our neurotransmitters, and helping to support the HPA axis, or our fight or flight regulation in our body. So it takes all of the premise of the deep, geeky science of the anti-anxiety diet and makes it applicable. So the intro kind of reminds the reader, it can stand on its own independent. If you want to nerd out, you need the first book, but on its own, it does provide basically the foundation of the 6R functional medicine approach of my anti-anxiety diet, and then really takes the readers through the journey of how they can use food as medicine.
Could you give us a refresher for anyone who may not have heard, the other episode that we did, which was specifically just all about your book and those, 6 pillars that you had in there?
Yeah. So working with functional medicine, the way that I address each client is like a detective of their body. And so I'm always looking at what is the root cause of their undesired symptom, or how can we work upstream? And rather than putting Band-Aids on molehills and seeing other things pop up and undesired symptoms with medication intervention, with functional medicine and food as medicine, we're always looking to really understand the whys and then correct and address the issue versus managing the downstream symptoms. And
Going
so
right to the root, you mean?
Yeah, totally. And so, I've seen in the last 10 plus years of clinical experience that whether I'm working with hormone imbalance or metabolic dysfunction or autoimmune disease, that if the individual is not mentally grounded and is running on fight or flight mode, or is experiencing stress intolerance, or is dealing with anxiety, that they're going to stay in some level chronically ill, because they're giving signals to their entire system that the body's not safe. And then we get irregular expression in the body. So my 6Rs take different entry points of drivers or root causes of anxiety or unbalanced stress response, and talks about how that influences, as a chicken and egg relationship, anxiety and mood, and then has different food as medicine solutions. So the first R is removing inflammatory foods. And within that chapter, I include sugar as one of the biggest pro-inflammatory foods, and right away present the role of the ketogenic diet as a tool to help to optimize cognitive function and neuro pathways. And then in the second R, I talk about resetting the microbiome. So about dysbiosis, how to create a symbiotic balanced gut microbiome, and how probiotics are nature's Prozac. So as we support our gut with good bacteria balance, we're going to have more optimal building for serotonin and GABA, those feel-good neurotransmitters. And then the third R is repairing gut lining. So basically, if we're dealing with leaky gut, all of those food particles and antigens can not just cross the gut-blood barrier, but they can also cross the blood-brain barrier, and they can create a lot of brain fog, difficulty concentrating, and inflammation. And then the fourth R is restoring micronutrient status. So that's where I talk a lot about genetic individuality. So different SNPs, the role of methylated B vitamins, mood stabilizing minerals, and different nutrients that play a role on our neural pathways. And then the last two R's, the fifth and the sixth, are rebounding the adrenals and connecting more deep into that HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenals. And then the final R is rebalancing our neurotransmitters.
So I know that you focus a lot on keto because we talked about before, it has sort of a GABA dominant, or supports GABA dominance. Can you talk a little bit more about why keto is so great for mood and brain health?
Yeah. So ketones are really unique. Well, we all know we're here, right? So we clearly know ketones are magic. So I don't need to give the intro, but the higher level of it is that, in the brain, ketones reduce oxidative stress. So we're going to get a cleaner fuel source with less inflammatory byproduct, right? We're also going to get the passage of ketones through that blood-brain barrier, and neurotransmitters actually can't cross the blood-brain barrier. It's a protective mechanism. So we have our enteric nervous system, which is the brain of the gut, and then we have our central nervous system, which is the brain and the spine, and they communicate bilaterally. So there's a back and forth feedback pathway. And, that's the connection of neurotransmitters made in the gut and how that influences. But ketones directly can actually cross the blood-brain barrier, and they upregulate our GABA expression, which GABA is like the ultimate chill pill. When we're thinking of like Parkinson's disease or someone that's dealing with tremors, if you're thinking of stepping on a stage and getting dryness in the mouth or like a little bit of palpitations or shakes at a first date, that's all when GABA gets depleted. And so GABA provides this really physiological grounding, mellow response. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter or a mellower outer. And ketones also reduce epinephrine. So they provide the grounding support of GABA while reducing epinephrine, which is also in layman's terms, adrenaline. So that excitatory fight or flight chemical is suppressed when ketones are higher in the body. And so that's very helpful also for us to not go into that panic distress mode.
Now, it seems like our brain shifts between this GABA dominant state or more of a excitatory state. And how do you find a balance between, we drink caffeine and take like adaptogens and, this and mushroom coffee and stuff to like get that maximal concentration and focus. And I love caffeine as an ergogenic aid as well. But then, there's a time to kind of switch that on so you get work done and get in work mode. But then, how do you balance the interplay of that with this more mellowed out, the stress reduction, the GABA maybe, is that more for, when you're done your work for the day and you want to transition into the evening and sort of get into that relaxation? Or do you have kind of any thoughts around that?
So I think that it's always important to understand your environment of, what does the day unfold? What kind of stress are you putting yourself up to? And then you want to think about what influencing factors you're using as far as whether these are excitatory or inhibitory. There are safe players that are what I call like pendulum swingers or regulators and can be like an adaptogen, for instance. A lot of adaptogens like ashwagandha, cordyceps, rhodiola, to name a few, are going to adapt to stress demand without driving too much of an excitatory response. Whereas if we just consumed milligrams of caffeine, that would keep raising that lever of that epinephrine until we would really deal with like palpitations and physiological distress, which would not be favorable. Mm-hmm. So adaptogens, by their definition, truly do allow regulation of that function. In fact, even many sleep formulas will include things like ashwagandha in them, and many people have no problem sleeping with them. They may also include nervines. Now, nervines are more calmative agents like German chamomile or valerian or skullcap. Those are different classifications of herbs that are more calming or sedative, or really the definition of a nervine is to support the neurological system. So lion's mane, kind of full circle in our convo, would be a great nervine as well. So adaptogens and nervines are great because they allow a little bit of both worlds of the spectrum. When we're talking about supplementation with neurotransmitter intermediaries or building blocks, for instance, like 5-HTP for serotonin, or a fermented form of GABA, like a pharma-GABA form. I have a supplement called GABA Calm, which is a GABA melt-away chew. Those should really be used and pulsed at times of demand instead of on a regular basis, unless you've done clinical testing and you know that you have insufficient metabolic pathway, or that you're functionally low, or you're working on weaning or adjusting medication that was influencing receptor sites. That would be the time that then you would use regularly. But something like, for instance, adrenal glandular. So I'll use that on a day or two after speaking. But if I took adrenal glandular on a day of getting on stage, I already have enough natural adrenaline going and I'm already like type A, do it type of person, that if I would take a glandular on a high stress day or a performance day, that would tip me over in an unfavorable way. So that's kind of where I'm saying you want to know your environment and the stressors you're facing if you're going to be playing with formulas to understand the mechanism of action. And the safest place to start, though, are nervines and adaptogens, and then nutritionals like B complexes and such that just support the building blocks themselves versus one pathway.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I don't even have coffee when I'm doing any speaking because I know, like you said, I already have all that adrenaline going, and it'd just put me over the edge.
That's not nice. Sorry, body.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but like the glandulars after are great because that's what prevents the like classic fly on the wall. You know, a lot of people, if you think of like holiday times or the classic example of someone gets sick over their honeymoon after a wedding, right?
It's like, gonna say, I wish I knew about these after my wedding.
Right? Like I hear that all the time because it's like the adrenaline surge, the build up, the go, fight or flight. Then you have the event and then it's like, you're flatlined for your honeymoon. You better go lay on a beach because you got to rebound those adrenals.
That's what I said to Pete when we were on our honeymoon. I was like, I now know what the honeymoon was for. I thought it was for like sexy time, but no, it's actually so you can just recuperate from all the planning and all the adrenaline. It's just like unbelievable. So let's talk a little bit more about your book. I definitely want to get into some of the recipes even that you mentioned about that have adaptogens in them. What are some like cool things that people can look out for in the recipe section?
Yeah, so there's so much. So I broke it down more classically as a cookbook, you know, so there's breakfast, soups, salads, vegetable sides, proteins as entrees, and then indulgences, which is the term I use for like desserts, and then kids section as well. And what I think is really interesting to kind of unveil and within my whole food philosophies is that I have a whole section in the book where I explain like, wait, is this even keto? ? Because I'll use in my recipes all whole food ingredients. For instance, there's a really dreamy carrot bisque soup and it's made with bone broth and it has full fat coconut milk in it. It has ginger, it has turmeric, it has orange zest. And then it has, I think, like a half or 2/3 of a cup of carrots blended into the entire batch of soup, so not per serving. And so I think the total carbs, not net, but the total carbs are like 7 grams. And then, you know, you're getting like 18 grams of protein and it's pretty high fat because of the coconut milk, something in the 20s plus. And so for many people that are fat adapted, they're easily going to stay tight into nutritional ketosis by consuming something like that, especially because they'll likely just be doing a protein next to it. Like if I was to eat that carrot bisque soup, I would probably have that with maybe like a shrimp skewer or maybe with broiled salmon or a steak. I don't know. It just kind of would depend on the evening. And so one of the biggest things is I'm really, I break out the food rules of this is a yes or no keto food. It's more about how does my body metabolize this in synergy with the composition of the dish and what is my metabolic handicap or flexibility and how do I understand that so that I can still get good diversity, food freedom, and some of the health supporting compounds that might be in some of those featured ingredients.
That's really, really cool. Yeah, I remember there was a time in my vegetarian days when I would have considered, you know, like I loved carrot or butternut squash soup. And I would have considered that a complete meal. And now to look at it without the fats and protein, it just seems like it more of, you know, just part of a complete meal. So I love that you're emphasizing that it's part of a bigger picture.
And I think it's all about the composition of the recipe too. You know, like you could easily get a cup of butternut squash soup that's 40 grams of carbs and has added sweeteners. And so it really depends, I think, on the composition and right, the synergy at that sitting for certain.
So it's back to school time and I really want to talk to you about some of your strategies for doing whole foods approaches like this on low carb with families and kids. Is one of the biggest struggles is finding a balance between, keeping your kids away from sugar and processed foods, but then not being that, restrictive mom who is like, depriving their kids of all the things that everyone else is doing. So how do you find, you personally find that balance for you and your family?
Well, I think what's really important to acknowledge, because as always, right, there's a pushback on like being overly restrictive and whether or not that's going to set up our children for success, or disordered eating, or food addictive tendencies and binge eating. And so it's all important to be mindful of the way we communicate within our household and the way we communicate with others. But I think on the other end of the spectrum, it's also very fair and important to discuss that the term food freedom, or like let them be kids, is not supporting your child for cognitive function, for behavioral health, for mental stability. It's a disservice. So I think it's really fair and important to say that sugar is not just empty calories, it's harmful calories that's going to disrupt the way that their body functions. And I think that that's just like, you just got to say that.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes with processed ingredients. There's just, in my personal opinion, and the way that I work with clients and within my own household, if it's not a whole real food, we don't have time for it. And in fact, like last fall, so Stella is my daughter and she's 3. And I have all sorts of stories to share about her, but I was going to say we were voting last fall, and we were in a conventional grocery store because we usually shop our farmers market, and then we have a community supported agriculture box delivery, and then we do different meat shares from different companies. And so we very rarely are in a grocery store, and if that, it's a natural co-op. So she's not used to seeing like characters on labels like Paw Patrol or Mickey Mouse, or, she knows who they are from a show or whatnot. We allow limited screen time and she's not totally in a box, but she was like, her mind was blown because we crossed through a cereal aisle and she was like, Mom, that's Paw Patrol. And that's, so-and-so character. And I looked at her and I like had a moment, and we like flipped the thing and I was like, these aren't ingredients. She can't read, of course, yet. That'd be a miracle. But I'm like looking at the list of ingredients and I'm like, but these aren't foods. These are chemicals and additives, and these do not belong in our body. These do not nourish our body. And so now when she sees things, she'll go, if a character is on it, it is not a real food, Mama. And so it's really funny. Like, I'm like, okay, I like don't know how loud you should say that on the playground and who's going to still be your friend. But you keep eating your cosmic purple carrot because, she'll be like, I have a purple tongue from my purple carrot, and she'll have that with her olives and her sprouted almonds and her pieces of turkey and, one other protein or something. Like we do wild salmon bites in her lunch a lot. But it's a learning curve. And I think it's just about providing autonomy of them to have stake in their decision process, even at a young age, even starting at age 2. It's which protein would you like for dinner? Would you like the steak or would you like the salmon? And teaching them that. And she's already saying things like, oh, Mama, I'm a carnivore like a T-Rex is. I need more grass-fed burger. So she's already getting food categories and we're involving her in the conversation of how to nourish and honor her body. And I hope that resonates in a way that she feels good about and not disserviced by.
I love that you said that because I really think it's time that we stop pretending that sugar is this harmless thing, especially because I remember, I think it was a podcast maybe I was listening to with Dr. Kim Berry was saying that if you think about the size of their bodies, he expressed this so well, and I was always trying to find a way to express it, but you think about the size of their bodies versus an adult. You think about we were talking about portion sizes earlier too, but a muffin or a cupcake, a full-size cupcake for us given to a child is like 6 for us.
Yeah.
And so to negate or pretend that sugar is not harmful, especially in a learning environment when you need your body and brain to be focused and available to all this education information coming in, and then to expect a child to sit there and focus and be able to retain information when their bodies are like filled with all this jet fuel, and then wonder like, why are they not able to just sit there and focus.
Right.
Is huge. And I really love that you said that. And it is, we all need to acknowledge what sugar is and what it does on the body.
And the sad thing is, then the child deals with shame because they're not performing well. So we've already created a disservice. Then they're dealing with shame at such an early age now. We're creating anxiety and stress in children, which was a huge component of me putting this cookbook out too, to make the conversation broader. Because, I mean, children are being medicated for mental illness starting at age 6. And as well as the world of ADHD and, behavioral disorders even earlier. And again, those are downstream modulators. Those are not resolution-based tools. And the statistics of manic bipolar disorder and mental illness of increased risk rates of 3 to 5 times of children that start on medication at that early of an age when their neural pathways are just being developed is really scary. And I think it's just all too accepted, and we're not asking why. I think there's also more of a need for children to get outside and play. I mean, there's a lot of things that we've shifted in a society, but we're creating really intensive expectations, and we're creating a disservice on how we're fueling them. I mean, the school lunch programs and school breakfasts are just terrible. I mean, I don't know the right word to say, but they are absolutely not nourishing, and they are setting up for chronic illness, and if not behavioral and mental, then a metabolic disorder, because we're starting to see fatty liver diagnosed at age 6, 7, 8 as well. We're starting to see elevated blood pressure, and all of it comes back to this excessive fructose, which is a hepatotoxin, a liver toxin. And it's just something that has to stop being normalized. The juices, the add-ons, the sugar, and it's just it's hard. It's a hard battle, but I'm fighting it. I'm trying.
You need to, because we've traded so much of these ancient traditions and wisdom and all of this, for time saving, and we need to relearn all of these things. And books like yours are so important to help that, but also just the guidance that you're providing and modeling with what you're doing with your family, I think is really important for people to know, how do I find that balance in, being able to not, obsess about this or make it, like we were talking about before, too much of an issue, but at the same time, nutrition is really important. So it should be an important issue, and it should be something that we talk about. And I love how you mentioned that choice and making your children a part of choice. And I love also, I think Dr. John Lemansky's wife, Jen, was talking about this on a podcast recently, that they have their kids each week pick out a meal, a dinner that they're going to have.
Yeah.
They have to, make it. And so it's like incorporating them in the process, and not just, kind of dictating like, this is what you're eating or not, or.
Yeah, I think all through autonomy and empowerment is going to at least create some anchor of freedom so that they don't feel victimized by it. And I think we can translate that to adults. I say that all the time. Like when we think of the adult process of doing a ketogenic or a low carb diet, the results that people get as far as reduced inflammation, enhanced body composition change, satiety, lack of cravings, we could go on and on and on. To me, that is the greatest freedom you can experience, feeling amazing in your body. And so we have these hardwired relationships with disordered eating, whether we've had a eating disorder or we've just grown up in modern society, where there still is this reward mechanism of sweet. And, it's people go to a party or an event and they think, as an adult, like at a wedding, oh, I can't have cake because I'm doing this program, this 30-day reset or whatever they're doing. And I'm always saying, you can have whatever you want, but I don't want to have that because I choose to feel amazing in my body. And it's just rewriting the script so that we feel empowered by it. And I think we have to start that with our children right away. Otherwise, the framework may not set them up for optimal success and the sustainability of this type of a protocol.
So what do you find works best for school lunches and meal prep? Do you have any tips on that? And that can we use your cookbook, to find some good ideas there?
Yeah, the turkey macadamia nut nuggets with liver are amazing. I think you would really like those.
I know, I'm like still thinking about those organ meatballs
the
that you
kidney
had
meatballs.
at,
Yeah.
at that party. Was they were so good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we did a event prior to KetoCon and featured all recipes from my cookbook. So it was a really fun time. But yes, those are fun. The macadamia, I actually use that in a classic keto. So I work with children with epilepsy as well as some genetic mutations where we have to stay in more of the classic 3-to-1 ratios. And so that recipe is one that we do for, a really tight ketogenic diet. The macadamia adds obviously a lot of fat, but it provides it's not nut crusted. You blend the macadamia nuts in the ground turkey and you do dark thighs and then you add liver as well and a bunch of herbs. And it makes these like little meatball, I smash them so they're more like patties, and then we do like a mustard aioli. Stella's already really enjoying dips. So we also have an MCT ketchup recipe in the book under therapeutic condiments. And so either of those are kind of a fun thing to just offset that little bit of that metallic flavor if children are still developing that palate. But if you from birth keep them savory, it's amazing. I mean, my daughter she'll say, "No, thanks, mama. That's a little too sweet for me." And I don't think many kids, that's even like a phrase that kids say.
It isn't, but once you have a savory palate, when things are too sweet, it tastes disgusting. And you're like, this is
you
what
create a visceral, like it's like your body rejects it actually. You go, "What?" It's almost like a bitter sour for some, it's the reverse.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what it is.
Yep, because Stella will like suck on a lemon and she's like, she'll still make a sour face, but she thinks it's so funny. So she'll always be like, "Give me a piece of lemon, mama." It's so funny. But we don't put lemon in her lunch. So we do the turkey, liver, macadamia patties. There's really good bacon, broccoli, egg bites, which are awesome as well. And they're just kind of like cups that we'll cut up. She eats everything cold in her lunch and she does savory stuff cold. We play with different rotations of jerkies. So there's like epic wild salmon bites. They also have a good bison bite. And she usually has 1 to 2 protein choices. So it might be that in a stainless steel container, she'll have chicharrones or pork rinds, and that will be a protein. And then she might have like some form of like torn leftover dinner protein. And then I always give her a vegetable and she chooses that. So it's either leftover roasted broccoli and I have Stella's simple wild salmon. And what do I have as the broccoli? I don't know. There's one form, her broccoli, bacon, sweet potato tots. Those are also really popular with kids. And so those are basically made with a little bit of roasted sweet potato and coconut oil. Mm. And then those are chopped up really tiny with pre-cooked bacon and broccoli, and they're formed with egg and almond flour into these like little nuggets and baked, and those are awesome. So she usually gets a complex carb and then her vegetable with 2 proteins, and there's always fat within it. Sometimes I'll add, like I said, olives or sprouted nuts or a nut butter pack. And we just keep it really simple. She goes for things, of course, like she gets a fruit or a sweet potato in most of her lunches. And, totally, she usually eats all of the berries because that's something that she likes. But at home, if she wants more of a fruit or more of that portion, we'll just discuss how, well, if you're feeling hungry, then your body probably would prefer some more of that protein that you have on your plate. And then she's kind of doing the wheels where she's like, "Oh, okay, mama." And it's a way to also, when you're working with a new food, Maura and I, Maura Vega and I have talked about how we'll like titrate blueberries. It's like the way to like, get them like, okay, you can have 15 blueberries and you're not doing the clean your plate challenge, but it's just a little bit of a motivator of like, okay, if your body says it wants this, let's feel out if it has room for something else first.
How do you feel about meal timing for kids and just, I see that talked about quite a bit, and having them I guess if they're in school, they have to be on a schedule versus, listening to their instinctual or intuitive hunger cues.
Yeah. And I think that it just depends on also like right away established with like cluster feeding babies and the breastfeeding process, because a lot of children in toddler age on are grazers. And I don't think that that's a good thing for the body. You know, all of the research that we've learned about the benefits of intermittent fasting and just letting the body have that parasympathetic reset of the digestive process. With that being said, I also don't believe that we should be restricting our children to fasting windows per se, but I think that it's important to create space between feed times. Like when Stella will go to a friend's house, often they always have something like, you know, there's like the packs and the pouches and the goldfish or whatever crunchy carb thing just out in all the spaces. And I feel like kids are just, they're in their car seats eating, they're just constantly munching. And I don't feel that grazing is a good approach for their metabolic health, and also for them to really create that relationship of what is satiety and what is hunger. It's more of a distracted, mindless eating and something to do. So I try to do more of like, yes, she has her lunchtime within her play care at the yoga peace school is where she goes. And then, you know, we do breakfast, of course, before school. And our breakfast is always, well, it rotates between a full fat yogurt and berries and cinnamon. And then the other option, which she mostly does, is eggs, avocado, and berries. And so it's, you know, one of those two, but we always make sure that she has protein and fat. So she's set up for a successful day.
Now, what do you do being a busy working mom with your own practice as you do? What are some strategies that you do to make, you know, maybe meal prep easier or eating real food just more, you know, realistic for working moms and busy moms or stay-at-home moms who are just juggling a lot?
I think the first thing we all have to do is just surrender to the flow and make peace with food preparation. Like stop setting yourself up to hate it. Stop setting it up to be something that's, I have to do. Like put on your favorite music and try to make it something that you embrace. And on weekdays, I mean, I can see 8 patients in clinic. I can be busting to go pick her up from school to try to have a moment at the playground and still then clean up chart notes and make a nourishing meal in 20 minutes. You know, we do a lot of pan searing in the cast iron and finishing in the oven. I mean, I think 5 out of 7 days of the week. So, you know, whether it's salmon, steak, bone and skin on chicken, we're always looking for the closest to the whole food form. And that always means it's going to have some level of skin or bone intact. So you always want to do a nice sear. And I love using the cast iron with a little bit of lard, where we'll do like 3 to 4 minutes on each side. As it's searing, I'll take asparagus, break the ends, pop them in a pan, put some avocado oil on that, rub them, you know, and put some good quality salt, pop that in the oven, flip my protein. And then I might even cut up another vegetable like broccoli, do the same thing, put that in the oven, put the protein in the oven. And then it's literally within 12 minutes of that and everything's rock and roll. So when we disengage the, I guess, negative associations and we just surrender, we make it an experience, and we can start already. Like Stella will break broccoli off the stems, and you kind of create this communal, like it used to be, right, relationship with this is how we nourish, this is how we eat at the end of the day. And you create the space for that within your family flow. And I think then it just is. And we do have fun meals where they're more complex, like maybe, you know, roasted spaghetti squash with curried shrimp and whatnot. And those I save for times that I have an hour and that I can really play a good album and maybe do some prep between clients or whatnot. But I think it's the mental blockage of just surrendering to the flow and knowing that this is a part of your process. And that itself makes it so much easier to do, like versus feeling like it's an annoying thing to do.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious if you do any batch prepping or meal planning like on Sundays, or like pre-freeze things, or use things like slow cooker or that kind of, like, do you have any kitchen kind of hacks?
Yeah, I do probably, like I said, honestly, 5 days a week is a pan sear or something. So that's like a quick, and it just tastes better.
Yeah.
But I do like having leftovers for at least one day. So we'll do like, we will do carnitas very regularly in the slow cooker, or like we will do a beef shoulder or rump roast and do some sort of a roast that's like, then we do tearaway meat that we can reheat. I always like to still cast iron and sear it so you get the crispiness of it, you know, like you want the crunch in your meat. So even if I do a slow cook overnight, I'm always going to probably still sear it in some way. But we will do like one a week, generally speaking. And it might be like a bolognese. I have a weekday bolognese in the cookbook, which also incorporates organs. I think that's one of the easiest ways to get organs in the body is incorporating within ground meats. So whether it's in a patty, a burger, or bolognese is beautiful because you can add the tomato sauce and a lot of different acidic flavor profiles that, again, make it more welcomed to a more dull palate, if you will, as your body's recalibrating and learning about these nutrient-dense foods.
Do your kids like the organ meatballs?
Stella does well, yeah, she does. But like I said, she uses an aioli, and I think that's cool, So I think it's probably a little bit, like she always will be like, "Mama, I need a dip," or whatever. And then we'll be like, "Okay, these are your options." And I might just real quick, again, weeknight meals, like, avocado or olive oil based mayo, whoop, slump that in a thing, add a little bit of seasoning. Like I said, it might be a squirt of mustard, stir it up. There you go. And that works really well.
Yeah, and I love one thing that you kind of mentioned is you make the food into fun shapes and things. And I think that's a huge component of why kids love all of that food we were talking about in the supermarket aisles that is so colorful and fun, because it just is more interesting to dip like a starfish shaped food into a dip than just some like regular drumstick. It makes it more fun for them, and it makes their food more, you kind of have to compete a bit with, what the food processing, industry does.
We have all of the gelatin molds.
Yes, the molds.
Dinosaurs, so many Legos, all the things. Yeah. And so we're always doing.
Go to your Instagram. I know you post some great shots of your lunch boxes.
Yes.
And things like that, so people can go and check that out too. Now, switching back over to some of the science in your book, I love to talk a little bit about leaky gut. And it's getting a lot of attention right now, like inflammation has been, but we're looking at, we're talking about the root causes of autoimmunity and trying to find the root cause of that. And gut permeability seems to be kind of a root cause of a lot of, the endotoxin that can end up in the body spilling out, and just the health and impermeability of the gut. Are we seeing more science coming out now? Because some people still say that it's kind of a theory. And I'm just curious what your opinion is on that.
Sure. So I think, we are bar none. There are multiple different labs that can be assessed to look at leaky gut. So you can look at zonulin protein. You can look at secretory IgA as a marker of gut permeability. You can also, go by symptom management if you can't afford the advanced testing. And really the first line of defense that I go for is with all food as medicine, it's a double-edged sword. So we look at abundance of therapeutics and we look at restriction of irritants. So depending on the level of gut permeability or gut distress, for some people, that's where like a keto carnivore approach would be the most therapeutic intervention, because it rests the gut from any of those anti-nutrients, any of the lectins, any of the abrasive compounds, because as we know, and I know you've discussed in other podcasts, that a lot of vegetation, all vegetation has to put up its natural defense because it can't flee, right? And most of the vegetation defense is to create gastric or digestive distress to the consumer. And I don't think that that's really discussed or understood enough. And with the same process, some people over time, as they repair and heal their gut with therapeutic foods, so it's not just by eating meat only, it's by ensuring that you're having the glycine in the skin. It's by so pork rinds are beautiful, or like I'm saying, when we do sears of chicken, it's always bone and skin on. Consuming, of course, bone broth, which is going to be very rich in L-glutamine, and gelatin, which is like a facelift for the gut, that basically creates that integrity and that sealant and protective layer. These therapeutic foods, and then you can even do gelatin and collagen powders and such and so forth. But I will always jump into, if someone is dealing with severe leaky gut, a bone broth fast. as the first entry point. And then we kind of determine from there how they want to phase their diet. And then as they're transitioning and exploring vegetables, we try to start with the least irritating. So I would always recommend staying grain-free and most definitely gluten-free. So like there's always right, a good, better, best of all the grains. Gluten is the worst. And then you kind of go down from there. And then there's some traditional heirloom types of forms of rices and whatnot. But most of the time I'm going to say grain-free regardless. And then, exploring within the vegetables like an elimination diet.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will have the ability financially, and if so, I would highly recommend doing a inflammatory food panel. So I like running the MRT test, which is the mediator release test, and this looks at 170 foods and chemicals and what drives inflammation in their body based on their own unique surveillance system of their immune system. And so I will see often, like a high red reaction in lettuce, or I could see that in something like even a health food like salmon or blueberries. And so when people are dealing with significant GI distress or chronic inflammation, I think that that's definitely a root place to explore. And we're all biochemically unique. We're all immunologically unique. And it's a part of our story, but we can actually upstream when we correct foundationally the gut lining by resting it and taking away those primary irritants and creating that abundance of the gut restoration nutrients. We can actually evolve to then have more diversity within the diet as well. So again, it's like with restriction comes freedom and comes optimal health.
Yeah, I always think that this is why people see such dramatic results in very short time periods on keto specifically, because you have both sides. You're restricting the things that may have been, creating problems in the first place, and then you're adding in all this amazing nutrient density and nutrient dense foods into that. And it's like this double whammy that creates, such incredible results for people, and why people get so, are so amazed. I mean, I know when I cut out gluten, for a few weeks, and I no longer was bent over, doubled over in pain.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, I didn't have to have part of my colon surgically removed just from not having foods with gluten in it, and you see the power in that. And then on the other side of it, adding in all those foods, which you have, some great sections in your cookbook on too, specifically on those foods that really support, all that gut health. And it's just, you really cover both sides, and it's awesome.
Thank you. I put together a table in the book called Bone Broth 5 Ways because I'm constantly prescribing bone broth. And in Austin, Texas, where it's in the 3 digits temperature a lot of the year, people aren't really excited about sipping on a hot mug of meat juice.
Yeah, exactly.
They can do brisket, they can do whatever, but they're like, And so gelatin recipes help too, but I think that the Bone Broth 5 Ways is a fun way to play with flavor profiles. So there's like a cream of spinach one, there's a turmeric one where it's a base of chicken bone broth with turmeric, lime, Himalayan salt, and cilantro, and it's very electrolyte restabilizing, and it brightens it up with that acid, and so I think that makes that more appealing when you're kind of in a hot, sweaty, humid environment. And it's just kind of figuring out. I think my big goal with all of the things that I put out, and my mission with this kind of food as medicine movement, is empowering people to understand what influence food has on their body as information. And, if they can empower themselves with understanding, just like a supplement, just like anything, what is the mechanism of action? What could this do for me on all ends of the spectrum? And then where's my entry point? What are my handicaps or limitations? And then is this a fit for me at this stage of my journey? Is it a fit later or not at all? And is it something I have to rev up to help to therapeutically heal? And how can I do so and still enjoy the process?
Now, one thing I wanted to just touch on before we wrap things up here is you talked a little bit about why there's a link between carb intake and leptin.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that from you, because I think it could be an interesting point, because you showed some of the symptoms that of low leptin. I really don't see that discussed very often, so it might be informative for people who want to learn more about that.
Yeah. So this came to me, I think, just kind of personally through my journey when I postpartum jumped into a really tight keto diet again. I was feeling amazing. I was able to lose a lot of my body fat that I had gained from the pregnancy, but still maintain really good milk supply and all of those things. But I started to, I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And so I guess the backstory for people to understand is that there are leptin receptors. Leptin is a hormone that in Greek term translates to satiety or fullness. And we have leptin receptors in different areas of our body. We have leptin receptors in the hypothalamus, which is the H of that HPA fight or flight stress axis. We have, and that's where people get, I believe, the keto high. When they first go keto and they're like, what's food? Like, you're like, oh, I could be at, an ice cream shop and not even have a moment thinking about it because leptin is docking at an appropriate level and leptin is being optimized. And in that brain space, then that tells us we're satiated and we don't need to eat. So we have leptin receptors in the brain. We have leptin receptors on our thyroid. We have leptin receptors on our ovaries. And then there's a couple other places in the body, but for this topic, best areas to focus on. And so in a postpartum setting or anytime someone's going through dynamic hormone change, the leptin receptors on the ovaries are something to be mindful of. And then if they have especially a thyroid disorder, they're going to be a little bit higher risk for lower leptin. And also the length of time that they've been on a ketogenic diet, as well as their percent body fat. So we make leptin both based on our endogenous fat stores, so the fat that we hold on our body, and we make leptin in the small intestine in response to fat consumption. And what I see often in women that are of an ideal body fat or underweight, and they're over exercising, undersleeping, over caffeinating, and maybe not eating enough fat, because sometimes because of that satiety, this happens to me all the time. Yeah. I forget to eat, or I just don't prioritize eating because I'm taking care of Stella or doing whatever. So if we're not feeding ourselves ample fat on a general basis, and we're at a lower body fat and we're over burning on either exercise stress or caffeine or lack of sleep, then often we can go from optimized leptin function to leptin depletion or too low of leptin. And we'll start to see that over time negatively impact the thyroid or negatively impact the ovaries. So if you're getting feedback that your menstrual cycle, you start to deal with, that's why we think of hypothalamic amenorrhea, right? This loss of our period, and that's that same hypothalamus where the leptin is docking. And so if you're not getting ample leptin action there, the brain says this body isn't safe, it's not fed, it's not satiated, it's not in a regulatory mode, so we're going to suppress sexual hormone production. Same thing with the thyroid. If leptin levels get too low, the body says, we're going to reduce the production of thyroid output, because the hypothalamus also makes your thyroid releasing hormone, and then the pituitary makes the thyroid stimulating hormone. So you get downregulation of metabolism and reproductive hormone if leptin isn't optimized. And so I do have in my book some guidance on symptoms of low leptin. I actually tested in my clinic. And I will say some women at an ideal or low percent body fat never drop low leptin. So, I think there's some genetic elements that are involved. I think that, like I said, watching your thyroid and your cycle are the easy ways as a female to know if you would benefit from carb cycling. And the connection on carb cycling is that leptin tends to respond with insulin. So most people enter a keto diet at a stage of insulin resistance and leptin resistance. So as the fasting insulin level goes down, especially someone like with PCOS, they're going to get more balanced hormone expression. Their sexual hormone binding globulin starts performing optimally. They start producing more progesterone, and that's all favorable. But in other individuals, it can start to, over time, with chronic restriction, dip too low.
Yeah, I find it really interesting as I was reading this article by Verda, and they were talking about how, I guess they hypothesize that the body becomes more thyroid sensitive, that, we've seen some studies out there saying that, there's a correlation between low carb diets and lower thyroid, but they're saying, well, that's similar to insulin. Your insulin is coming down because you're becoming more insulin sensitive. So they were theorizing that your body on low carb or keto could potentially be becoming more sensitive to thyroid, and therefore that's why it's making less, or it needs to make less, which I find interesting. But it's still, not anything we know for sure, because some of this stuff is still quite, leading edge.
It all goes into the reference range is only a range based on the current population.
Yes.
So, so what, currently I'll say, I love to see free T3, which is the active form of thyroid hormone, at 2.8 or greater. But honestly, I've been looking at that as well in clinic and seeing people that have a free T3 at 2.2, let's say, which is maybe suboptimal, just at the clinical level of starting to be clinically low. And if they're asymptomatic and they don't have an elevated thyroid peroxidase, meaning a marker of autoimmune activity or other elements of distress, I'll just say, let's just watch it, because your body probably says that you don't need to burn more fat right now. You're at kind of a set point. It kind of depends on, again, the individual. If they're looking for more weight loss, then we want to kind of figure out why their thyroid's downregulating. And that's where sometimes that people get the whoosh effect from a carb cycle. It's that safety swing of the body saying, okay, Allie's feeding herself, now I can burn again. And so it just kind of depends, again, on like where the individual is at with their goals. Because I think a low free T3 on its own, if metabolism is optimized, is not directly concerning. So that's, again, that redefining the reference range.
Yeah, I remember my doctor was like, your fasting insulin is way, way, way too low. I'm like, yeah. You're comparing it against, the reference range, like who does not do keto or, intermittent fasting and all this stuff. But I wonder, do you also see instances where maybe, because you kind of touched on it, where maybe the body fat percentage is too low and fat intake is not high enough?
Yes.
And or protein, and that could be maybe associated with, cycle disruption or that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's kind of an either or, and for me personally, it works really well. And I notice that I don't ovulate if I don't do a carb up. And I haven't, though, to be fair, I haven't tracked and made sure that I've gotten, for instance, let's say, because I bet some days I probably only have 60 grams of fat because I'm just rocking and rolling, so I get my tablespoon in my morning, I get whatnot, I might get 70, but I haven't tried the opposing of 120 grams of fat every day to see if that would create that satiety. And for my lifestyle, it just works easier because I like how I cognitively perform and whatnot in my current eating style. But I think that, yes, I think that you could optimize leptin levels if you consistently got enough fat. And I think, though, that example female that I mentioned of like the mom with a couple kids undersleeping, they're probably not going to consistently get enough fat. They're just not, so it'd be great.
It's hard.
Honestly, it is.
It is hard. I mean, in the past several years, I think it's probably the question we both see all the time. Like, how do I get enough fat? Like, because we've been trained to fear it, and we don't understand how to just eat whole foods and just get, the fat that naturally, and we've been avoiding red meat and all this stuff too. So you kind of have to go out of your way, if you're not eating a lot of red meat, to add fats in, right, and like save them when you're cooking and, do the bone broth and do all that stuff. A lot of people just don't have time, to do that. And it's just not appealing to like just eat a bunch of fat. It just doesn't sound,
Well, and I think as we get more sensitive to the feedback of our body, like I noticed personally that like I only can do so many nuts and seeds and nut butters. So like I can do an F-bomb pack or a nut butter pack, but I can't do 3 in a day. Like that's not going to feel right. My skin won't respond appropriately with the arginine imbalance. And so it's a little bit of a troubleshoot when you don't have the body fat reserves. Because on the other end of the spectrum, we've both dealt with as well. People are like, why aren't I losing weight? And they're eating 108, they're like chasing these fat bombs and adding 5 tablespoons of fat to their coffee. It's like, whoa. Yeah. So it's just a dance based on, again, the entry point of the individual and where their current system is at, for sure.
I had made a note here, so I have to ask you before we leave about the CBD. Yeah. Why did you put these, delicious CBD balls and recipes and things. I really don't know enough about CBD and the, cannabinoid system in the body and how it's activated. So maybe you can tell us why we would want to try out some of those recipes.
Sure. And if you want, I will give you the recipe so you can share it because we can't teach you. I mean, you guys all need to buy my book, obviously, but I'll give you that so you can share it when this goes live because we can't keep dangling that.
Yeah.
They were so good. So yes, they're called lemon lavender CBD balls. And it's just like a dream of a fatty truffle. I don't know how else to describe them, but because it has like the floral essence of the lavender and the citrus notes of the acid of the lemon. But yes, that's the one recipe in the cookbook that has CBD. But like I said earlier, I use it in my coffee and, pretty regularly to help to mitigate a fight or flight stress response. So when I was talking before about the enteric nervous system of our gut and the central nervous system of our brain, we also have an endocannabinoid system. And so humans are hardwired to respond to cannabidiol or cannabis compounds, and CBD is the cannabidiol. There are cannabidiol compounds that are made endogenously in the body. In fact, breast milk is a very rich form of CBD. So as we're breastfeeding, and it's, I always say, I'm like, formula companies will be on it. I mark my words, I should invest in a company. In 5 to 10 years, they will be adding CBD to formula. Not that formula be recommended, but I'm telling you it will be in there. Because CBD has immune modulating effects. It also has anti-inflammatory effects. It supports appetite regulation and satiety. And it has anxiolytic or calming anti-anxiety effects. So that helps put your baby to sleep. It helps their growth and development. It helps their healthy survival skills and mechanisms and immune support. And that translates into all ages. So we have different receptors in the endocannabinoid system, CB1 and CB2. And so CBD hits both of those. And it has no psychoactive influence, but it does have an anxiolytic effect and can influence GABA. Whereas when we're talking about marijuana, which has other medicinal, I mean, that could be a whole episode, but and I'm not anti, I think marijuana and cannabis in general and its whole plant form has a lot of beneficial properties, but the variants of CBD and why that's becoming a little bit more openly mainstream is that it doesn't have any psychoactive properties. And that's coming from the THC, the other plant compound from the cannabis plant. And the THC only hits the CB1 receptors and it influences dopamine more, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter. That's like the joke of why like you would just like get the munchies or like go for the bliss reward seeking. Like, ooh, these lights are so cool. And CBD, you will get more of a GABAergic response where it's more of that calmative influence. So that's where now they're looking at formulas that have a blend where it might be like a 5-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC, where you can get some creative thought process without the agitation, anxiety, because too much dopamine can make us hypervigilant. Like, and that's like the paranoia association that we think of with smoking weed or whatever.
Yeah.
Good closing for a mom talk.
Yeah, I know. Like we just went right in the mom zone there. Oh, the hit in the pot. That's awesome. I am definitely going to share your recipe because it was super delicious and everyone's eyes got like 5 times bigger when you started passing those out because they looked so delicious too. So I'm sure everyone will love trying that out and they can get a sample of what is more to come in your cookbook. So
awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and sharing so many great tips and so much great information. That was one of the things I loved at your presentation at KetoCon, and you got to talk about it a bit today, is just, doing too many of the things and trying to do all the things and how that can be detrimental. And I love how your book and just your approach is just kind of like, one thing at a time and just using food as medicine and healing and looking at it kind of in the bigger picture.
Yeah. I like the phrase. I think of it as like a health supporting things still impact your allostatic load. And you have to think of like your body like a wardrobe, right? So if you're going to buy a new outfit, you might need to take something out. And so if you're going to add sauna, if you're going to add a higher exercise intensity, you need to just think about how your system has to keep recalibrating to these changes. And you can gain muscle from lifting a weight, but if you lift that same weight for 24 hours, you're going to get atrophy and tear. So it's what is my, level of allostatic load that I can use this health supporting stressor to yield good outcomes and not close my tunnel to the feedback of my body and white knuckle and say, come on, body, get on board, when it's yelling at me that this isn't working.
Exactly. That's awesome. That's so well said. Well, thank you so much for being here again today, Allie. And I know everyone's very excited. Congratulations on putting out your new cookbook.
Thank you. It's always fun talking to you.
Awesome. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode with Allie. If you want to try out keto with me as your coach and support and guide, you can head over to ketogenicgirl.com and check out the Ketogenic Girl Challenge. The original 28-day challenge comes with my support and coaching, and I am your guide as you try out keto, or if you've been doing keto for a while, you're just not seeing the results that you want to. I would love to have you join us and support you to answer any questions that you have about doing keto, about the meal plans and recipes that come with the program. And they provide a ton of delicious, easy to make and easy to prepare recipes to do keto and get the results that you really want to get. So head over to Ketogenic Girl. If you like this episode, share it with someone that you think might enjoy it. Hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more. And until the next episode, I hope you have a fat-fueled rest of your week.